Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is the fourth of 5-part series called Future London, which has been produced for you as a joint project between the London Society, which I represent as a trustee, and our chairman is here as well, and the Knowledge Quarter, which is wonderfully hosting this venue at the Impact Center, so or Impact Hub. So thank you very much to all of them. Before I hand over to the Knowledge Quarter, I just want to say a few words on behalf of the London Society. Some of you I know that are here are members. We are a member-driven organization that are all things London. So if you love London, you really got to get online and join the London Society. If you haven't done so already, we do events, we do wonderful productions like these. And this particular series was inspired by the realization that AI is changing the lives of all of us. And so we sort of put our heads together and said, how do we get people together to think about how AI is changing London and indeed the lives of Londoners? And that's how we put this whole thing together. The first one we did was about arts and culture. Some of you may have attended that. We've done one on health. We've done one on sustainability. And tonight we're here with a wonderful panel to talk about how AI is influencing and impacting the built environment, which surrounds us every day. So I want to thank you all for being here. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I'm going to hand over to Jody to welcome on behalf of the Knowledge Quarter. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And thank you for all of you coming here today for our latest edition of our Future London series, a series of public discussions looking at the technologies transforming London. I can shout. I'm more than capable. The staff will tell you. So tonight, our esteemed panel of experts will be exploring the ways in which new technologies are changing how London is being designed and built. You'll have time to ask questions later at the end of the discussion, and after, you're more than welcome to stay for drinks and for more networking. As mentioned, I'm Jodie Eastwood, and I'm Chief Executive of the Knowledge Quarter. And in a moment, I'll be asking the panel to come up on stage and introduce themselves. But for those that don't know, the Knowledge Quarter is a partnership between the major research organisations, universities and cultural institutions situated within a loose 1-mile radius of King's Cross Station, out of which we were founded a little over 10 years ago, and including organisations like the British Library that sit at the centre of our geography. This partnership can be thought of as both a product of its built environment and a conscious effort to influence it. So working alongside Camden and Islington councils, the area's historic institutions like the British Library, the British Museum and UCL wanted to capitalise on the development boom around King's Cross and St Pancras stations. The boom included the Francis Crick Institute, which is Europe's largest medical research institute, and the redevelopment of the 67-acre King's Cross estate, which was led by Related Argent, which was at the time one of Europe's largest redevelopment projects. This area was once the lifeblood of London's industrial revolution. It's now home to the architects of a new revolution. The site's former granary building in King's Cross is today occupied by Central St Martin's boundary-pushing arts and design students. Platform 37, aka the Landscraper. The name was given because it is as long as the Shard is tall, set to be the home of Google's new European headquarters. The building, like the distinctive shopping centre, Coldrops Yards, which neighbours it, was designed by Heatherwick Studios. Its founders, Thomas Heatherwick, has recently called for the built environment to be humanised, which I think is really, really important as humans. But how exactly do urban environments maintain their humanity in an age of computational design, of AI-generated shape grammars, and planning proposals gamed with ChatGPT? 100 years ago, Somerstown, the ward lying alongside St Pancras and King's Cross, was a slum, better suited for bed bugs than for human inhabitation. But seeing the absolutely horrific conditions, the housing reformer, and interestingly, Britain's first female chartered surveyor, Irene Barclay, introduced an innovation in planning. She consulted with the people that lived in Somers Town about their living conditions, and those insights is what led to the development of groundbreaking social housing. So it all started here, it all started in the Knowledge Quarter. And without this data, without this kind of data, artificial intelligence has absolutely nothing to learn from. AI is a mirror to ourselves, mirroring back what we already know. And today, the rich data sets produced by Londoners still make up the human in the machine.
That's word.
But what happens to the city's identity if these data sets are not specific to London, but aggregated from around the world? For all the talk of humanising the city, for all the consultations, London faces an enormous housing crisis. In 2025, new home construction collapsed to its lowest level since the Second World War. So what role can new technologies play in reversing this trend? And how do we ensure that these black box technologies are held to the same rigorous standards and liabilities as their human counterparts? To explore these issues and to paint us a picture of what the future of London will look like and also feel like to inhabit, please join me in welcoming onto the stage our wonderful panel. So we have Pablo Zamorano, who's the Senior Associate, Head of Geometry and Computational Design at Heatherwick Studios. Russell Curtis, the Founding Director of RCKA Architects. Funbi Adeyagbo, Head of Building Regulations, Principal Designer Services at Catalyst. And our moderator for the discussion, Tom Holberton, who's the Associate Professor at UCL's Bartlett School of Architecture. Will you join me in giving them a big round of applause? And please hold your questions for the end of the discussion. And I think you probably need this.
Thank you very much. I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm an Associate Professor at UCL, working in the intersection of AI and architecture in my research. I also teach a studio there. I'm also a practicing architect.
That was a dramatic entrance, wasn't it? Quite low down these seats. I'm Russell Curtis. I'm a founding director of RCKA Architects. I lead on the practices, policy and research work, which includes a recent grant from the Geospatial PropTech Innovation Fund to develop a geospatial AI that identifies small sites across local authority areas, and we've been using that to build the evidence base for the next London plan, small site housing targets.
I'm Pablo Zamorano, and I lead the applied research and AI team at Heatherwick Studio, where I've been for about 11 years now. My background is in architecture, and I've been working on both leading projects and also working on the technology side of things, trying to drive the best design tools we can and implementing kind of emerging technologies into our processes.
Hello, my name is Funbi Adeyagbo. I am the head of the PD services at Catalyst, which is a multidisciplinary compliance technical advisory organization. I'm also a member of the RBA Council and an architect. In my role as a head of the principal designer and building regulations services, we look at compliance in the built environment in general, and that's regulatory compliance, but the organization I work for also expands into the full construction process in terms of compliance there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're in the Knowledge Quarter, and we're sort of in a part of London that's undergoing very rapid change at the moment. We've got Euston Road, we've got the British Library extension, we've obviously got Platform 37 and Coal Drops Yard. I think the question is, what is it about London specifically that makes it sort of so exciting to use AI in design and construction? Are there particular characteristics, from your experience that perhaps make this a really interesting place to explore this area?
Thanks. I think one of the big issues, certainly from our point of view, is the fact that the data availability for London is very, very good. So the work that we've been doing on the London plan is based on data sets that we've managed to get at London level, and is pretty consistent across the whole of London. So we've been basically training an AI to identify characteristics in individual freeholds and intersect that with policy layers around things like transport accessibility, historic character areas, and being able to get hold of relatively easily very large data sets that cover all of those things across all of the 32 boroughs and the City of London is extremely helpful. And we've been trying to apply this same process outside London, and the availability of data is not so great. Now we've got, obviously there are some really superb pieces of sets of data from Ordnance Survey and Land Registry at the national level, but when you get down to local planning authority level and trying to obtain things like planning policy layers, it's hugely variable in quality. Whereas in London, at least, there's a requirement that this data is made readily available in a consistent format.
How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this area in London is an extremely active area nowadays. And I mean, I've been lucky to actually work on some of these projects you mentioned, Coltrop's Yard, since 2015, working on that project till it opened, and then on Platform 37. And I think it really, talks about the excitement that the new generations that are working actually on these technologies are having in being here, in being in kind of what it's becoming or could become one of the centers of kind of technology and startups, not only for the UK, but even for this part of the world. So little by little is the next name that is always popping up. The other thing is that the actual companies, the large ones, the ones that the government is engaging with, Google in this case, is also there, and that means that again it's not only about kind of where the city these buildings are placed, but actually about the knowledge that is being kind of worked on and produced is also happening here. So I think it's just reflecting on the excitement that everyone is having about this.
Tommy, do you have a view on that in terms of what makes London exciting at this moment in terms of AI?
I think it's quite an interesting one, because a lot of the work that I do has to do with building regulations, and there's the high-risk building, etc. And there's a lot of volume of information that you have to process with the new regulatory framework that's been put forward. And it's affecting London probably disproportionately, because most of those tall buildings are actually in the country are being built in London. So in terms of AI, we see it being used more and more to kind of manage the information that we're now having to produce, which is good in terms of it's good to have a good stock of information, because again, more information, data you gather at the beginning, it can't be reproduced later down the line. But actually the day-to-day management of that, we are seeing AI coming into play in terms of being able to physically manage that within obviously very constrained time frameworks that everyone is working to, the construction industry generally works to. So it's definitely something that for a city like London will be pivotal in how we develop and how we manage all the new processes that have come into play, especially with driving higher standards across the built environment.
You say it's it comes from information, and we're sort of aware of the way in which data is so integral to what makes an AI tool. From your sort of personal experience, how have you found that good data can potentially reveal something original or unusual within a project, or have you alternatively sort of found that sort of poor data then leads you down the wrong path? I don't know if Russell, you had experience with this in terms of you were saying the local authority.
Yeah, I think what we've been doing is sort of pattern recognition rather than using LLMs. So actually, the data that we are using we're creating ourselves from a lot of the information that's available from various sources. I think one of the big advantages that we have, in addition to the quality of the data, is the opportunity to influence as well. And if I look, because London has obviously the GLA as the principal planning authority, with a whole load of very clever people doing statistics and transport planning and things within it. But they also have the knowledge around things like that. So the people might be familiar with P. Does anybody know what PTAL is here? I don't know whether people are architects or or what background people are. Anyway, PTAL is the public transport measurement in London of how easy it is to get to the public transport network. That's about to be replaced with a new thing called SAM. But the interesting thing in London is that we have a way of measuring this stuff, also a way of predicting what will happen if certain interventions are made, but then also influencing things. So at the London level, so if we are, for example, measuring travel patterns or whatever, or we want to measure what the impact of a new station might be, we have the London level data to be able to do that. And that's really powerful. That I think outside, and this will happen with the new local government reorganisation. But at the moment, London is unique in the country, really, as having complete control over all of its data in that way. So what has it got bad outputs? I don't know. I mean, so we're not using it we're not seeing sort of hallucinations in the work that we're doing because we're not using it in that way. We'll come on to talk about the risks of AI in planning generally, I think, where there are significant risks of that, but that's for a later question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can probably jump in on that one in terms of you mentioned hallucinations. What we've okay. I mean, I've got a mic here. I just didn't want I'll lift it a bit higher. I was told not to shout, so I was avoiding that. But I can speak a lot louder. Is that okay? Yes. Okay. I would say that in terms of the point of AI and the use of AI when it comes to compliance, there is the risk of hallucinations, as you said, building regulations, for example. There's a lot of clauses that are the same name. So Schedule 1 in the building reg, Schedule 1 in HRB. I mean, everyone in the industry is trying to grapple with that. And what we've seen when AI has been applied to information and reporting is that sometimes it as well will get hallucinations and say you're not compliant. And it takes a human to kind of unpick that. I think we're still at the beginnings of this process as a industry, etc., country trying to implement better standards. And AI, while it can help you kind of churn through information, you still need the human interface to be able to detect the nuances, because again, it's the data you feed it. If it's not going to recognize the difference between wording that is exactly the same and context when it comes to these kind of processes. So I think that's one thing that it's kind of, anyone thinking of applying AI to the process needs to kind of consider. The other thing is that it's only the information you fed it. So when you're looking at nouveau design or something slightly more bespoke, the AI might flag that it is unusual and it will require human interface or intervention to be able to deduct whether it's fit for purpose in the context of that, because the AI wouldn't have had the data or the information to be able to make that deduction. There's also a lot to do with design. Compliance is not fixed. If anyone, this is the biggest illusion in the industry. Compliance is relative. It's what's appropriate is actually what the building regulations say. So in that context, you really need people interpreting things. Well, again, AI can churn out, you've got a typo here. I can tell you there's a lot of typos. People in construction industry tend to make mistakes, but it's fine. We're builders, not necessarily poets. And so it can help you deal with those volumes, which actually you do need to get that removed from the system because it causes confusion as soon as you change your information to a different set of stakeholders. But yeah, you still need that human check in relation to the AI, because again, with the amount of innovation that we have to deliver on our housing and building targets, you still need people to do that, but it's more of like a data management.
So in one sense, for a professional work in AI, they have to recognize this risk of hallucination. They have to be present, to make the decisions. I wonder how much the other aspect of the kind of the creative and the generative end of the process, how much the nature of a professional might change. So Pablo, your experience in terms of building tools that potentially might be generative within a practice, what role there is in terms of proactively collecting data like that, or maybe even working in a more research area at an early stage with developers and landowners. How do you all see the changing role of professionals in this context?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think AI is demonstrating to be very powerful. And to your point, I think we see it from the side of especially from the user side of this, and we also have to kind of come up with ideas where we're using it to get to the information faster, but also having it flagging where it's making an assumption, something that may not be real. But with generative AI, what happens is that these models are training a huge amount of data that are kind of supposed to please most of the people. And so it doesn't take that long to get to a point where the answers, anyone will get, or whatever type of suggestions, or if you're using it for creative kind of purposes, you may reach this kind of monotonous layer of let's say, of answers. And I think that's where it's quite important for us to understand whether we want to take it further. And what we've been doing in the studio for some time now is to work on custom models that not only will give you a different, let's say, response, but trying to find where that level of quirkiness can be actually something good, and in a way kind of express or bring back some of the of what we like to kind of engage with when we're talking about any design problem, really. So it's not necessarily giving you the right design solution, but it's actually flagging something that is going to make you come up with it.
One of the things that really excites me about it is the way that we can use it quickly to solve existing problems. So thinking about the work that we've been doing with MHCLG and the London Plan team, when the last London Plan went through the examination process. So the London Plan is a regional spatial strategy for the whole of London, and it had specific targets in there for small sites. And when it was first published, it was 250,000 homes were required on small sites across London. When that went through the consultation process, it was cut in half because the evidence base didn't exist to sufficiently demonstrate that those number of homes were available on small sites. Now, the work that we're now doing was a direct result of that, because I went to the examination in public when all of the boroughs sort of came along and gave all the reasons why they didn't think this was possible. But there must be a way of finding the sites, because at the moment it's hypothetical and we look at it as sort of historic delivery. But we know something about London and about the characteristics of it. There must be a way of going through it almost site by site. It's taken a long time, but we're now at a point where we've managed to analyze 2.1 million different data points in London and identify every single small site. So it's no longer possible for somebody to say, well, we don't think that there are, 20,000 sites in Bexley. We know there are because we found them all. We can take you to them. That wouldn't have been possible had we not had access to the tools that we now have, and to be able to scale, to be able to build an entire software stack and the mapping library and build the learning model and then analyze the whole of London in 2 or 3 months is an astonishing feat for a small practice of only 15 people or something. So we're not a tech company. We're just architects who happen to be interested in this stuff, and it's really given us access to these abilities that we would never have had before, and just could not have done at that kind of scale. It doesn't feel particularly innovative, but the ability to apply this new technology to existing problems is really powerful.
I mean, it's an incredible sort of feat, and how much? I mean, clearly some of this data has been around. So how much do you feel that was a sort of a deterministic exercise, and how much do you feel it actually required a degree of intuition, in the way in which you sort of went about gathering the data or connecting the data? Because I think often there is this question about, connecting different kinds of data in deep learning that is quite an intuitive thing and quite an exploratory and playful thing, which architecture perhaps naturally does.
Yeah, I mean, it's very intuitive because we have to go through multiple rounds of it. So you have an idea that you think something's going to, this is how it started off. Have an idea that something like that, and you test it with some existing, open source tools. It kind of works, but it's not that accurate. But it works enough to be convincing that it's worth pursuing. So we went to MHCLG and won some funding to allow us to dedicate some time to it. But it is it's not a sudden solution where you and it's not just about the AI. What you're doing is you're categorizing sites into different in different categories. You're putting them into different categories, and then testing and say, are those categories right, or is this does this particular site fall into more than one category? And then you have to sort of reteach the learning model time and time again. So it is an iterative process, and there is, that I don't think that could have been done quite so quickly had we not also been architects, because we're applying that spatial training to a solution that is really just a sort of a two-dimensional pattern. I mean, the AI doesn't know whether it's looking at sites or the brain sections or something. It's just recognizing patterns. So we need to sort of apply our knowledge to it. But yeah, so I think being architects is fundamental in making that work.
If I can add a little bit to that, because I completely agree about this approach that is not necessarily only focused on what most of people think about AI, generation of images or text, but we worked for some time on this machine learning tool in the studio that was kind of getting some of the knowledge we gathered for a book we published recently called Humanize, coming from kind of the world of neuroscience. And we applied those in a tool that measures the level of complexity on facades on buildings. And it was quite interesting to see kind of the results, and then trying to understand how you could kind of implement a series of scores based on the level of complexity, and try to kind of get new or find the opportunities, within those designs, whether they were kind of already built or were kind of coming from new images or sketches or 3D models. And the other side is, even if you start with an image, then trying to find ways in which you can actually treat them almost as a BIM model. So, we have 30 years of kind of experience working in different parts of the world, and tons and tons of images from mock-ups, construction sites. And all those images have information about who was the manufacturer, the supplier, the specific location where they were produced and they were installed. All that information now can be added at the moment you are basically working on a collage or a rendering, and that information flows with that image and adds a layer of intelligence into something that previously was just a common rendering or a sketch. So I think working with these tools is just extremely powerful. I think it can open, in a way, a layer of seriousness or intelligence at the stage where otherwise we wouldn't kind of think about that.
Yeah, I think this sort of multimodal way of working, where you can get seemingly slightly disconnected data sets that might be text and images, but might be quite different things aligned, and explore how they align, within an urban setting, within a kind of early conceptual stage, does open up enormous sort of opportunities for the way in which architects, developers, landowners might sort of work together. What's funny about AI is this contrast between one side that's very generative and playful like that, and then the opposite side, which is regulatory and is has to give kind of rigorous results, accountability. We're not far from Grenfell. We have the Building Safety Act, which has come in and has really shifted liability more towards the individual. You can't sue an AI necessarily. So how do you see this shift? The shift in within the construction industry, is that an obstacle to the adoption of AI, or are there opportunities within AI to actually kind of provide greater accountability and more records in a way?
No, absolutely. I think the AI is a tool that helps save time, so you have more time to focus on those other things that actually generate more value. So it takes away a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of processing. Like I said earlier, what we would typically see people using the AI for is to get through that, churn through that information and check for the common mistakes. And then that, if you've got an hour to do something and the AI has done 90% of the stuff that you could have given it to any human being to do, you now liberate the remainder of that time for the expertise to kind of flow in terms of what are we doing, whether it's in the design aspect. Okay, we've got something that meets the basic requirements of compliance. How do we enhance this so that it actually meets all the other parameters, the client's brief, society's brief, the designer's aspirations in terms of quality? Now you're not spending all that time trying to focus on just delivering compliance, which is the minimum you can actually do. just to point that out, compliance is the minimum you're allowed to do. I think with the input of AI, we probably can see a cultural shift so that we're not doing only the minimum, but starting to aspire for something slightly more aspirational, because time is always one of the things that is very pressed, and especially in the construction industry. So if we can liberate time from mundane tasks by giving it to a computer and leaving the people to do the tasks that are actually a bit more aspirational, then I think we can improve the quality of what we actually produce.
I think that's absolutely right. And what's really interesting is that Google's really recently won this tender from MHCLG to assist with planning decisions and validation processes. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. So I mean, an average borough might be dealing with something like 10,000 planning applications a year. 2/3 to 75% of those are likely to be things like household or planning applications, the kitchen extensions and loft conversions and or material, conditions discharges, that sort of stuff. So my understanding is that Google's going to be focusing on that firstly to do with validation. So you should be able to, when you upload your planning application to planning portal, it should be instant, right? Is it valid? I mean, if you've got a north point on all your drawings, but actually what happens at the moment is that goes through planning portal, it goes to the local authority, some officer sits down, looks at all the drawings and there's, oh, you've missed a north point off drawing, 14B, and it gets rejected 10 days later. You find out that you've got to, submit again, or you've got to provide this information. It should be instant. So that's one thing that could be massively improved. But also household planning application. I mean, determining whether, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's kitchen extension is 50 centimetres too high or whatever is not what you've got officers sitting doing, 30 or 40 of these at a time. It's a complete waste of resource and they're under a huge amount of pressure. So if we can find ways to simplify and automate a lot of these processes, there's always going to be a degree of expertise required in order to make the final decision. But planning officers are under such pressure that if they can start to think more strategically about planning, so planning is, it should be about working out where infrastructure and homes and investment goes, but actually too much of it is dealing with ridiculous sort of minuscule things that are unimportant in the grand scheme of things. We need to refocus planning, and I think AI could have a transformative effect on that.
Yeah, maybe another kind of interesting side on this is that because now we are engaging with Google to work on these things, this data will have to become first the single source of truth, and second available to everyone. And I think that will also help to have a way more transparent process. And as we just going to your point on liability, what often happens is that it's very hard for anyone to actually find where the communication or the right communication or the right information may be. I think this is going to bring some light into that. I'm going to expose that, so it will be much easier, hopefully, for us to actually find a clear understanding of the process and find the possible gaps and solutions.
I mean, this question of the nature of the information seems to me quite a challenge with that, because within architecture you have sort of drawn information, which actually is kind of inherently quite difficult for machine learning to read at the moment, and then we have a lot of language-based things. So in building regulations, it's a whole mixture of diagrams and text. So there's a strange asymmetry at the moment, in that certain kinds of intelligence are very, very, learnt by machines. We can kind of instruct agents very effectively now through language, be it kind of patiently, if anyone's worked with agents, sort of stating something 10 times to try and get it to learn to do something. But other aspects like drawing are actually quite behind. I wonder what kind of role there is for, architects and the wider industry to try and address this asymmetry, particularly if you've got things like digital planning, because it seems like you'd be able to check by text certain things very well, but not necessarily drawings very effectively. I don't know if you've got a view, Russell, or...
Well, yeah, I think I mean, clearly architects at some point, like almost every profession, are going to be fundamentally, I don't think we're going to be made completely superfluous, but it will be utterly transformed. And most of the things that we do day to day are quite mundane. And if we can improve some of that, a bit like planning, right? I mean, if we can remove the mundane tasks and allow us to spend time doing the things where we bring the value, then that would be great. I mean, I do worry a little bit about, particularly with this Google thing, about who's controlling the data. I mean, if we're there, I mean, who knows what they're feeding into their, to create their LLM. But if they're feeding people's planning applications, there's some big, it just already exists. I mean, in terms of copyright, but if they're just feeding hundreds of thousands of planning applications into to create an LLM, then who owns that? So some quite big questions over that, which I don't have sleepless nights over anything, but just does raise some questions. But yeah, I think that a lot of the work that we do as architects, we're not trained for. I mean, we sort of pick it up as we go along. It's we're designers first and foremost, but quite a lot of our work ends up being not that. I mean, writing planning statements and all that sort of stuff, which just should be sort of done more efficiently by an AI. And anyway.
And it's quite interesting because I think, for what I'm seeing, architects are actually very up for trying new things. And if I was to kind of to thinking where the curve of adoption in the technology is, across kind of, I don't know, real stages, the farther you go to, more and more, towards construction, the less, I will say the curve goes down and down and down. So I think probably in the design side of things, people are more willing to adopt new stuff and will be ready to actually evolve into whatever shape, kind of this technology enables to become. As on the construction side, I think there is much more work to do. And also in terms of the technology, how this is also going to potentially enable a different ways of manufacturing and construction. So I think that's probably, or what I hope at least, to see the biggest change, because that's still something that works way more in the past, I will say, than the design side.
Yeah, and I think getting this specificity is a real challenge. Architecture inherently makes kind of different buildings every time, and yet we're also dealing with these huge universal models that are trained on huge data sets, not necessarily in the UK, ingesting huge amounts of information and then trying to make them quite specific towards sort of architectural challenges. So I don't know if from your experience you found ways of making these more specific, whether within a practice, Pablo, or are there kind of initiatives we should be exploring as a profession to kind of try and build more of a specificity, whether it's for London, whether it's for local authorities, whether it's for architecture, to kind of address this gap between the universal model, and a kind of inherent challenge?
Yeah, I think so. I do believe that this technology can help you leverage the value of what you believe should be or should have value. You can go very deep into fine-tuning these models, or you can even create small language models. Those can be based on your own research or your own kind of identity and so on, or they can be a very, very acute specialist on something very specific. If you want them just to kind of check on some sort of a specific regulation. I found those models to be very effective in comparison to using just a common large language model and ask it to do absolutely everything. But again, I think is how you combine both into the same or in similar workflows, let's say, or to work in parallel, if that makes any sense. But that's at least how we've been using them. So we spend quite a bit of time trying to understand how we like to do things, how we like to visualize what we design, how to like to explore the materials we like, or how to explore kind of new references and spark our creativity. So it works kind of very well with kind of the human side.
Yeah, and one thing that really excites me is the ability for us as a small practice to be able to to create very bespoke tools for things. Like just using normal AI tools like Claude, for example. We just completed some work for the GLA where we've been working with Hounslow and Lambeth boroughs on their own land program, their own housing delivery program. So trying to help them to understand what they own and what they might do with it. And within the space of a week, we built an entirely bespoke, from ground up, interactive website that allows them to upload their geospatial ownership layer into it. They can then go in and they can draw site boundaries, and it does some density calculations based on a series of formulas that we've developed, again using Claude, to give them a rough idea of capacity using their own local plan data to optimize it to account for their different mixes of homes and tenures, all within a week. Just and it's amazing kind of interactive website. They can fully secure, they can log in and they can make notes and things, and they can then triage sites, and and that's a very, very specific function that they don't yet have in-house, that we've managed to do in a few days. And I think there are lots of examples of where we are quickly spinning up tools that we can apply with a very high degree of accuracy and a very high degree of quality that's utterly transformational. And I think there's a huge democratization happening where, for 20 quid a month, you can get a Claude subscription and build these tools, which would have, you just couldn't have done before. And I think that's hugely powerful. It's also dangerous in a lot of ways. Maybe we'll talk a bit about objecting to planning applications, because that's now a thing. Object to AI. If anybody's been to it, you can spin up object to AI, spend you 75 quid, and you'll get a complete set of sort of objection letters written for you by a large language model. So there are challenges with that, but it is, I think, there's a net benefit of all this stuff, which is really exciting.
I just wanted to add to that. I think one of the key things is that while you can use AI to facilitate design, which is largely what we've been speaking about, but you can also use AI to facilitate the other processes, as you mentioned, Russell, that as architects, we do a lot of things which is in design. So all of those other tasks that you find around the office or in your organization, you can actually leverage AI to do those tasks as quicker, again, liberating more time to do all these other things. And AI it's so expansive that you can get it to do pretty much anything. So it's a tool to help you solve the problems in terms of operating a lot more efficiently. And while I know many people in the industry, AI is going to take away our jobs, it's not about that. It's learning how to leverage it to liberate more time and becoming an expert in getting it to do what you need it to do, while retaining that kind of specialist knowledge that keeps you, as an expert.
Yeah, I think this question about how much agency has now been opened up through these tools is extraordinary. And anyone who hasn't done already tested this, the capacity to go and make a website or something like that, it's quite terrifying now. What an agent can go and do. And in a way, there's enormous collaborative and interdisciplinary opportunities through these things. I wonder just briefly to finish for each of you, what you think the regulatory or technological landscape should look like in 5 years if we're going to make the most of this. Just a small question. If there's certain things that you think should we should be grasping for, in the face of this enormous kind of upending of agency.
Okay, well, I've talked a lot about planning, so I'm going to carry on. I'm going to run with it. But I think that planning policy is hugely complicated, and we're going through a period of significant reform at the moment, particularly with the new spatial development strategies and the new strategic planning, regional spatial planning that's on its way. Planning is always, because in this country it's complicated and it's discretionary and it's all about negotiation and compromise. And what I think we need to be better at is getting upstream and allowing citizens to engage with the planning process much earlier on. So at the strategic stage, rather than just when somebody puts a planning application for some new house at the end of their garden, of which they'll object to. So, and I think that AI has a massive part to play in that democratisation of the planning process, because it can ingest thousands of pages of policy, a lot of it conflicting from, you know, at the national level, the regional level, the local level, and help people understand what that means. So I think that the application of AI to the planning system is very, very exciting. There is a risk, as I've said, about the objector AI thing, and, you know, effectively what's going to happen is you're going to have AI generated letters of objection, and the planning officers simply going to feed all those into their own LLM and generate some stuff from it. I think that probably renders the entire thing irrelevant, and so that sort of process is on its way out. But the ability to engage much earlier, I think, is hugely powerful, and I think that's going to be the biggest transformation in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to take it from the design side, I suppose. My hope is that in 5 years we will be, I think, in a city where we'll have much more design, especially younger generation, actually enabled to design better buildings. And I think by having more information available, by having processes that run smoother, by having more, I think, exposure to how things work and knowledge, my hope is that the younger generations will be able to actually propose better buildings.
Humby, do you have a final few words?
I do. I'm hoping in the next 5 years that AI will be there again to empower people who didn't have the capacity or wouldn't have the capacity, or take so much time to get there, to be able to do more with their time. Young people who have to churn through thousands of documents. A gateway application is normally around 1,200, 1,500. I've seen 2,000 documents that has been produced by a group of people, and helping to just cut through all of that noise so that we can focus on what's really important, which isn't meeting the baseline of compliance, but actually developing cities, spaces, buildings that work for what society actually needs. So leveraging that tool to liberate us to do the really important stuff. That's why I want to see AI, and also putting the right checks so that we don't end up with AI doing everything and there's no human involvement, where we're kind of just subject to the computers, or, you know.
Excellent, thank you. So I think that concludes the discussion. If we can go to the Q&A. If I can ask people to keep their questions very concise and human, rather than AI, as we've heard. We're very okay.
Is this thing on? Yeah. Yeah, the cube is on. Russell, you mentioned Google's involvement in planning applications. That was reported in the press as an almost altruistic venture by Google. The reality, of course, is that Google will not be doing most of the work themselves. They're in third place when it comes to cloud platforms, and they want to get ahead. So they will have heavily discounted Google Cloud Platform, Gemini models, and a partner will be doing the work. So with that in mind, King's Cross is about to become the second biggest AI hub in the world after San Francisco. Google DeepMind were there first. Anthropic, OpenAI, Nscale are all following. So my question is, if Google's deal was not truly altruistic, do those companies owe London something in an altruistic sense, above and beyond the pure economic benefits?
Wow. Okay. I mean, clearly it's not altruistic. I mean, that's a nonsense, isn't it? My other worry about the fact that it's who owns the data is Google does have a tendency of sort of doing things and then just a couple of years later getting rid of them, and because yeah, well, exactly, all that stuff, and you think, well, I mean, I think that I don't know what the contract was worth. It was a few million quid, wasn't it? But it wasn't, you know, but on Google scale, I mean, it was peanuts. Exactly. So, yeah. So, but your question is not really about that, is it? I think do they owe us something? Do they? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. The fact they're investing here in all of the economic benefits, I think, is. I think it. Well, for me, yes. I mean, there's data centers and things like that. We can have a chat about where data centers should go and the sort of the impact of those on communities and some of the things, some of the benefits that they may generate. But you know, if they want to invest here, I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And actually, sorry, just one more thing on the you know, prop tech is is quite exciting at the moment, and the fact that Google is interested in it, I think, is very useful, because it raises the profile of prop tech generally, and it's not. And there was some criticism, I think, when they got the award from a lot of. And we have a very good sort of startup culture here, particularly in the prop tech space, and there were, I think, a lot of people with eyebrows raised the fact that they won this commission, which I understand, and that maybe MHCLG should have been supporting sort of nascent firms who are already, you know, who are London born. But having said that, the fact that they're interested in it, I think, is really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the lady behind you.
Thank you. So in the Knowledge Quarter, we have really high levels of development, and we also have a really real issue of consultation fatigue. Our communities are being asked again and again and again, and more often than not, their repeated feedback isn't taken forward into decisions. So my question is, do you think AI can help us move from repeated consultation to continuous engagement, or will it just scale the same fatigue at pace?
Oh, that's quite a question. Okay, from me, do you want to?
I can kind of respond to that. I think it goes back to the point of who's holding the hammer. So the organizations that are pushing out the consultation, the institutions that are mandating that, whether they adopt the AI and mandate that it's actually a continuous rather than a piecemeal process, is where you get that. As a community, that's probably where you'd be demanding the change and requesting that as the primary first feedback. Number one, don't ask us the same question twice. And that's probably where definitely AI is very good at pattern recognition. So in terms of collating things so that you can see the trends, it can do that. But the only way you'll get it to do that is if the people commissioning the actual exercise are mandating and instructing the AI to do that.
I've got to add, I mean, I think one of the interesting things generally with AI is it's very often framed as a sort of quite deterministic kind of software frame. We're used to kind of computation doing actions, giving actions, but it's very good at probabilistic kind of outcomes. So in the sense in which with some of these sort of wicked problems within planning, you know, where you've actually got trade-offs the whole time, you know, that there is an opportunity to use some of these tools to kind of build a more rich and kind of a better informed kind of understanding of the different trade-offs that maybe a community is making all the time, and maybe retain some of that kind of community memory about kind of, you know, one application happens here, but therefore the next one perhaps has to be a bit different.
Yeah, just to add one thing, I think it comes back to this question of who owns the data as well. I think one of the reasons that all this sort of consultation fatigue happens is because you know, there'll be a scheme that happens, and so they go out and do the consultation program, and then that's done by one consultant, and somebody else gets appointed to do something, and there's a PDF that's produced that sits on a server somewhere, and we went through this process, and these are the people we spoke to, and then, you know, something else happens, the same thing happens again. It's all siloed, and we know that the quality of the data is absolutely vital for these things to work, and so there has to be some way of consolidating this or sharing this information, you know, GDPR and everything notwithstanding, that and I don't know who holds this, but that seems to be, if you're asking the same questions over and over again, then that's a failure in the data chain somewhere. I mean, that just shouldn't happen. But also, it does come back to this issue of democratisation, and at what point do you need input from people, and that shouldn't be at the point that you're you're putting an application for a housing scheme in, it should happen much earlier in the process, and so people then positively influence how their neighbourhoods are shaped over the coming years, and have agency over that rather than just responding to something, which is what happens at the moment.
Can I
Yes,
sort of ask a question and answer that as well? I mean, one of the things with continual consultation is that generally the consultation responses are submitted to the local authority at the time of the application. So one could imagine a situation where the local authority can collate that information with the help of AI, so that each time, because the consultants are not going to share and the various people who've owned the site are not going to share once they've moved on. So the local authority could build a bank of information every time there's an application that goes in. But my question is related to sort of hearts and minds around planning, because as you said, AI can be used to do multiple no responses. Now that's already happened throughout our history. There's already people who sit in rooms producing constant letters. So that's nothing new. Where we've always failed, and I think Claire and I were talking about this with Matt Clifford, the ex-AI czar, on a podcast recently, talked about the fact that we have no way of quantifying the lost opportunity of saying no. So my question is, do you think we could get to a situation where an authority is looking at, okay, I've got 200 objections, but actually I know through past examples that if we say no to these 10 houses, this is where we are now, through saying no to housing, where we have no housing and young people can't get housing. Do you think we can get to a situation where we can quantify lost opportunity through AI?
I mean, it's difficult, I guess, to sort of to get all the hypothetical data. There's a thing of kind of world building, which is emerging in AI, which exists as much in sort of NVIDIA have models and things like that, where you'll test kind of robotics and you sort of simulate everything that might be possible within an environmental scenario. So you can have gravity, you can and you can basically prototype something that you might build in the physical world, first in this kind of digital environment that is kind of effectively kind of built through a machine learning model. I wonder how much there will be kind of versions of world building, that could tackle social and economic questions like this, that actually would sort of apply data and try and understand, okay, this is the set of consequences if we take this route. It's tricky because you're always building kind of inference from previous examples, and obviously things change the whole time, but the kind of world building techniques are going to, I think, have a bigger and bigger bearing on what happens.
I'm a bit skeptical about that, to be honest, because I think that we know what the benefits are. We know that if we build a new housing scheme of 150 homes, that lots of people are going to object, but there's probably going to be 400 or 500 people who get a home, and we know what the health impacts are. We know what the economic benefits are. We know all of those things. I think if we're asking those questions at the point a plan application goes in, it's too late. I don't know that we need AI to build a sort of a model that tells us that stuff. We just need a fundamental culture shift that moves us from this sort of reactive process to one that's proactive and positively planning and thinking about all of these factors holistically. And I don't know that AI probably has a role to play in that, but I don't think is going to unlock it in any way. Not yet.
Is there another question? Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I come from a different world from you all. It seems that this event is focused on the architectural world and design. I work in telecoms, and we share some similar challenges in terms of the difficulties to deploy infrastructure in the urban environments. And we also share some of the solutions through the usage of different technologies. My question for you in the panel is about where do you see the kind of the interlock between both works? In the telecommunications world, we provide connectivity for the communities, and we want to be involved in the design and deployment processes of the urban environment to improve capabilities for everyone, so that everybody can utilize kind of the connectivity services, either mobile or fixed, in the right way. But I see a disconnect in the development of the cities in relation to the connectivity needs. And I don't know if that's one input that you utilize in your planning and design processes to kind of evolve in that direction as well. I know that there are some directives to measure the quality of the connectivity characteristics of buildings, and there's some evolution in that sense. But I don't see that there's a lot of interaction between our industries, and I think that well, there's an opportunity to improve that. What are your thoughts in that sense?
I mean, just so this question about I guess how we apply lessons, there's an urban question about connectivity, but I also wonder whether there's a question about digital twins and kind of reapplying, for within architecture, there's been a long ambition to measure the performance of buildings in effect and kind of reapply that as learning. Hasn't necessarily been that successful. I don't know if any of you, somebody have.
I'll jump in on that one. I think it's kind of, again, back to the point of planning cities ahead of it. So when you're at the planning stage and you get commissioned a site that's going to have a high density, that's the point where you probably want to be interacting, or that information needs to be translated to service providers so that they can then build a model of how they deliver the infrastructure. It's kind of too late when it's already happening there. We have,
very long in the case where buildings are being developed in new areas in London, and it takes years to recognize that is happening and to react to have a sensible connectivity offering.
So exactly that. What needs to happen is the information needs to flow, as you've said. So at the point of planning, if there's an open source, the council is providing this information and you get an approval that there's going to be a new development there, they can assess, the same with the PTOL, what the connectivity in terms of data is at that point, so that, again, the providers and the other industries that need to interact with that can start to plan ahead and be strategic in how they deploy. I live in an area of poor connectivity, so it's something that probably be very, very happy if it was resolved before you were there. But definitely, it's again of having a digital twin or that communication between the right stakeholders. And AI might be something that can help, but it generally is just people sharing the relevant information with the right stakeholders at the right points in our process, which seems to not happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems is these different sources of data with different stakeholders, and certainly something that AI models can do is in effect kind of transpose information from one set to another, from one model to another. I mean, it's a huge amount of time spent within architecture and around architecture.
But it's interesting to think about what the new platforms will look like, because the opportunity here is that we can stream live data from our cities, and we can visualize it. So we're not only tracking, let's say, empty plots or the opportunities, and one specific layer, but we can also see, for instance, how the city is performing an ecological layer, even on top of the new buildings, or we can kind of measure, whatever is getting built or got built some years ago versus kind of the promises that were supposed to happen. So we can find different optics if we have access to that information. But it seems to me that the technology at least is enabling this opportunity of actually tracking live information across the city.
I think there's a platform, View City, if anyone has used it before, that can kind of show you where the planning permissions have occurred and what kind of building they are. And maybe, again, with the point of what Russell's, you can build AI tools that can extract that information potentially, so that you can kind of get ahead as well, finding the right tools and leveraging it if you can't.
For planning applications for structure across, there are also solutions in place already.
Yes.
I think I've got the cube now. It's working. The mic's died. So, yeah, I mean, if this feels weird. I'm just going to speak loud. A few years ago, or probably 10 or 15 years ago, the whole thing about smart cities. Smart cities were a thing. It's our micro sensors everywhere, in every lamppost. And that seems to sort of have died a bit. But one of the things that AI is really good at is dealing with massive data sets. And you would have thought that bringing those two things together, talking about infrastructure, because actually what's really interesting about telecoms infrastructure is partly about the connectivity it delivers, but also the information it generates around the way people move around cities and the sort of the use of cities, and because you can track people anonymized about how they move around. So all this data that we should be generating to tell us about how the city works and how we can change the plumbing in order to make it work better, that surely should be something that AI is capable of doing quickly and efficiently. I'm not certainly aware of anybody that's really applying it in any meaningful.
Most patterns and data exist in telecom.
Yeah.
Probably what you're saying is those are not being shared into
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we utilize them for different purposes. We determine the movement patterns to understand where the traffic demand is, to increase capacity and deploy this type of incremental infrastructure that you're referring to them. That was happening a few years ago. I was involved in that. And I think there will be a next cycle of that coming. But that data, going back to your point, is not being put in front of you, it's not being shared. We are not enabling that conversation so that you can make the best use of that for different purposes that maybe are not relevant for our industries.
Very relevant. There's a building reg associated with that. So very, very important part Q.
I mean, I think
Also,
Yeah.
I think also the kind of the previous paradigm was based on this, the Internet of Things, and having small sensors absolutely everywhere. The reality now is that we have sensor absolutely everywhere. So everyone has a sensor on, their pockets with their phones, and people are, kind of photographing and sensing the city, all the time and posting it somewhere. It's just not kind of commonly available. We also have now, I don't know, especially on this part of the city, we're full of Waymos, no? So this new kind of, automated self-driving cars, they're just a giant sensor with wheels. So they are also having a recollection of reality that at the moment only lives in, let's say, their kind of shared brain. So it's how we can access that information, or what are kind of the policies that will make this information available so we can leverage it together.
I think we have to finish up now. So thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists and our hosts.